Good afternoon, and thank you for joining Diversity MBA's Smart Webinar Series. We're so excited to have our guest with us, Andres Gonzalez, Chief Diversity Officer of Fort Art Health and Wisconsin Medical Center, and Neddy Perez, Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion, both Equity and Inclusion, of McCormick & Company, to celebrate and acknowledge Hispanic heritage, but to also have a deep, authentic conversation around what is happening within corporate America and the advancement of Hispanic talent. And I will tell you both, Andres and Neddy, that I sometimes get tongue-tied when I want to say, or like Latinx, or Latino. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we get started a little bit, I'm going to ask, and we're going to go ladies first, Neddy, just to take a minute and share with our audience a little bit about who you are.
Thank you. So Neddy Perez, as Pam mentioned, Head of Global Diversity at McCormick. I've been with the company 3 years now. And prior to that, I have about 25 years of experience in the diversity HR space and corporate communication. Advancing talent in organizations. So I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you. Now, Andreas, will you please share a little bit about yourself and the work you do?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you so much, Pam, for having me here. And I'm always winning when I'm actually in the same, sharing the same space with Miss Neddy Perez. So that's the accolade to a trailblazer there within our community and in the field. So thanks for having me. As you mentioned, Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer for our integrated health network here in the southeastern and greater Milwaukee area. I have been with the organization now for 6.5 years and leading a holistic strategy around our equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism strategies for the health network. Prior to that, I've been with a number of other healthcare systems. And then prior to that, in the smaller not-for-profit Latino serving organizations. So I think it amounts right now about 27 years. And I'd like to say that I started at the age of 12, but that's hard to believe. So I'm just getting old, but really having fun leading this work. So thanks for having me.
And you're absolutely welcome. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have both of you, because you have been in this space and you do bring forward, more than 50 years of experience. 50 years of experience, but I think, yes, we do want to have the perspectives of the younger generation. But right now I wanted to really, help bring a holistic approach to this conversation on keeping pace with the Hispanic talent boom. But before we get started, I wanted to, really recognize and talk about, Hispanic heritage. We know we've been celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. We also celebrate, if you will, a Cinco de Mayo, earlier during the year. And we also celebrate other types of Mexican as well as Latin celebrations around the world. And I think it's very important as we are in a age of understanding, and I'm like leaning into differences of understanding each other's culture. And I am not, I will share this with you guys. I am not a stranger to the Mexican American community and the Cuban and Puerto Rican community. So my household is bilingual. My children are multicultural, and I estudio en España, Madrid, in Spain, and Guadalajara, and was fluent in Spanish for many years. Now I'm more functional, so I have to practice with Andreas and Neddy a little more. So very close to my heart. So it's important to know the cultural connections that we have. So I just, want to open up, Andreas and Neddy, for you both, just to share a little bit about, the work your organizations are doing and have done around the celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month, but what it personally means to you. So Andreas, I'm equal opportunity. We'll start with you.
All right. Well, I will say that, that's an interesting question. And the way that I will open up in terms of my remarks is that I've been pretty mindful of what it means to me and what it should mean to our organization. So I think it has to extend beyond the fun, food, and flags. I think it's fine to have fun. It's fine to have food in some of those events right during the celebration. But at the end of the day, this is a great opportunity. We have a great platform not only to celebrate, but to recognize the contributions that Hispanic, Latinos, Latinx have made, right, in every sector. So about the history, the culture, the achievements that they certainly have been able to contribute to. And so for us, since I'm actually in healthcare, the approach that we have taken with our Latinx BRG is to really promote a lot of that. So one of the things that they did this year, which was a little bit more on the fun side, but still very informational or educational, is that they had it rotating. They were rotating every day within the month a particular individual that has made a significant contribution to healthcare. And it was really powerful because I had a number of senior leaders that said, I didn't realize that one of the first cardiothoracic surgeons, actually the first cardiothoracic surgeon that performed a surgery was Dr. Favaloro, who happens to be Argentinian and did it in my own neck of the woods in Cleveland, Ohio, the Cleveland Clinic. So it's that type of thing, right? So recognizing those contributions and what it means, right, to further the work that we do, right, the strategies that we are leading here, and really shedding some light around the disparities or the inequities that exist even today. So I think that really has been a little bit of that approach. But then beyond that, then our BRG also has taken an approach of looking fundamentally around their strategic objectives on how they're actually helping us to really create greater engagement, that sense of belonging to our staff. And then ultimately also, if we can do that well, then the correlation there to really providing that exceptional consumer or patient experience. And that really is the best work that our BRGs have done. But certainly our Latinx BRG is doing some really cool things there. I'll just close by saying during COVID this past year, one of the proudest moments that I had is when our Latinx BRG came to the leadership. We talked about certain things that needed to happen based on the feedback that we're receiving from the community, and knowing that over a third of our community right here in Milwaukee were impacted by COVID, and many of them were unfortunately not surviving at that time. So it was a heart-wrenching time, and they proposed the creation of a culturally and linguistically relevant public service announcement. And that became a game changer. And again, that was an idea that came out of our BRG to meet a community and certainly an organizational need that we have. So to me, that's the power and the way in which BRGs can contribute, and how we can continue to further educate and create cultural competent workforce right here in the southeastern Wisconsin area.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that robust sharing. I really like the fun, food, and facts, and it's more than that. So I love that. And Neddy, and share with us what's happening in McCormick and what it means to you, what Hispanic heritage means to you.
Yeah, no, Hispanic heritage is definitely very dear to me. It's such an important community in the United States because of the population growth and the skills capabilities that we're seeing. We know from other studies that our SARE has done and a few other organizations that show that Latino employees also tend to stay longer with organizations. So I think that's really important. And then as a consumer product organization, we know that the Latino market is very loyal to certain products. And so we try and every year celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. This year, what we call our employee ambassador groups in other companies, they're BRGs or ERGs, they got together and they started a series called In the Kitchen With. So anybody who may be Latino recognizes that, whether it's your abuelita, your grandmother, or your mom, that you learn about food and family and communications being in the kitchen, because we love to eat. And so they started a really great series called In the Kitchen With. And so the first one that they were doing was with a member of our board of directors. And then that was going to be following several other series. And it was appropriate for our culture at McCormick because we are a food flavors company, so spice and flavors. And so many of the spices that we produce and or use in cooking really come from places in Latin America. And so that adds an additional twist to the conversation about, what's your favorite food? And now I'm more of a dessert person. So that to me is a food group. But but it provides a really robust opportunity to connect with leaders and individuals, much like educating people about, who was the first, cardiac surgeon, et cetera. Those are all important. I would say, though, that aside from doing educational fun series like that, I totally agree with you, Andres, with regards to it. While the Heritage Month and or other employee group activities should have a balance between social activities and helping to drive either HR or business goals. So we introduced it this year, to have every employee group have a diversity action plan that focuses on 3 core areas: workforce, so whether it's recruiting, whether it's developing talent. Then there's the work environment, so it's more about the culture and how do we help people better understand the culture of McCormick. And then marketplace, so that we could begin to link the activities of the employee groups, not just to community initiatives, because we are huge.
Okay, we know Neddy froze probably temporarily, and she'll be right back with us shortly. But in the meantime, I just wanted to, I'll just jump in and add, I wanted just to say real quickly, Andres, and people may not know this, but a lot of Hispanic mothers, they would go to the supermarket, Mercado, down the street every day for fresh, vegetables and ingredients. And it's so important, I think, that people understand. Don't you think the idiosyncrasies of cultures, and that's where some of the social gatherings come in, so that when you do the learning and the education of what's
Right.
going on, the appreciation is broader? Would you say that's part of the
It is, Pam. And one of the challenges that we have, again, talk about the connection between the work that Ned is doing right through McCormick, and really the importance and the relevance to our culture around eating, and overall well-being. One of the things that we are certainly right now addressing is really how our community, how we can educate our community or work with our community to
yeah,
understand how do we educate them in a manner where they would be, again, eating the same things. Actually, I'll use myself as, point in case. I love
yeah,
pork chops. I'm actually one of those guys that love pork, growing, in Puerto Rico, right in the Caribbean. But, one of the things that I had to learn and be disciplined around is that I cannot be frying my foods all the time. It is not good for my cholesterol. It's not good for my life, right? So the question becomes, how do I still can eat that and retain the flavors, but make it healthy, right? So baking it does wonders, right? I mean, I can still marinate them in the same manner. It still has the same and retains the same flavor, but now I'm making them certainly in a healthier manner. And so that's a lot of the work that, as a system we're trying to do. And then also, addressing some of the social determinants of health, including, to your point, about the necessity of having food security in our communities,
yes,
right? And in the Latinx community, in many of our communities, actually the community that I grew up in Cleveland was a food desert. We had a bunch of bodegas, but they all were selling, your typical chips and pop and soda. And
yeah,
so that was not healthy. And a lot of our family, especially my mom, would get really upset that, I cannot find, to your point, Pam, fresh fruits and vegetables. So how are we going to
right,
do that? That's part of the work that we are formulating here. And certainly we have invested in a number of food markets to ensure that now we're providing that there's availability of fresh fruits and vegetables in our communities of color. So then we can actually then help, right, and guide some of those key efforts that are underway. So it's
yeah.
really,
So I
so
hear that. I'm not going to let you say so anymore, Andreas, because you bring. I'm going to jump in there and just Neddy, as you can see with the conversation. But before we get into really talking about advancing Latino talent in the second half, I have one more question, and Neddy, I'd ask if you can, start off with the address of this. So this is an etiquette question for people, because it's almost like a preference when you think about the LGBTQ plus IA community and just on and on, non-binary. Where is it appropriate to ask a Hispanic, do you prefer, Latinx? Do you prefer, are you Mexican? What ethnicity do you prefer? Can you help us with, so people can feel comfortable when they're not sure what to do, but what they can do? And I'm going to start off with you, Neddy, and And Andreas, you can only jump in if Neddy doesn't say the same thing.
You're muted.
Oh, I think you're muted, Neddy. Tech assistant Erica, can you make sure she's unmuted?
Okay. Yeah,
Oh,
for some reason it said the organizer muted me, so thank you. Hey, so I think it's very appropriate to ask individuals, whether they're Latino or LGBTQ, of how do you identify? It's kind of like, what pronoun do you use? Do you prefer to use? I think in the Latino community, even, and Andres jump in, but even in the Latino community, there is a misnomer around, oh, Latinx or Latino or Hispanic. And so I think for the most part, the designation of Hispanic was a US Census Bureau created designation. Over time, they added the term Latino because some countries don't identify themselves as Latino. And so more recently, this whole piece around Latinx was added as a way for younger Latinos to find new identity and be able to claim their identity. That is not a designation that is used in reporting to like the federal government, representation in corporations, but it's really more of a preference of a particular group of individuals that want to be signaled out as being more progressive. And so that I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I think I'll just add something very quickly, and I think Neddy hit on this, which is I think it's extremely relevant that you need to ask. Actually, we had a lot of debate here in terms of what nomenclature were we going to use, what's going to be the name of the group, and as we know it, we are like any other community. We're not monolithic. So you're going to have people all over that continuum, and also having to take into consideration acculturation versus assimilation, right? So there's a number of other cultural factors that come in, and generational as well, where people, right, will either say, hey, I do ascribe to that, or I abide by that terminology or not. And so, I think it's extremely appropriate, especially when you're either referring to your staff or in our case, even to patients, to ask those questions, because you don't want to make the assumption and then certainly go down a particular path where you might be offending someone because, right, it's my bias versus what they would like to be identified. So I think it's an important point. And the last point that I'll make is ultimately, because I was thinking about that question, I honestly can care less about Hispanic, Latino. To me, all that stuff is labels. Bottom line is, I actually identify by my ethnicity. I was born in the island of Puerto Rico. I'm a proud Boricua, and that's how I identify. If people, for U.S. Census purposes, I need to put Hispanic or Latino, that's fine. But at the end of the day, I'm Puerto Rican. That's my identity, and that's how I define my identity. So I think it's something to certainly to ask. So good point.
I identify as Cubana because that's what I grew up by. It's what I know. Like, I'm Cuban. So I will add one more thing to Andres's comments, and that is there is this whole new wave of conversations happening around intersectionality. So we're probably going to be seeing, especially as there are more multicultural families, more conversations about identifiers, and that's going to change. It's probably over the next 5 years, we're going to have whole new designations.
And it's so crazy. We could just spend this whole time talking about that, but I want to pick your brains for a little bit more. But that's true, right? How we're being able to actually leverage what one community, the LGBTQ community, did in terms of necessity to help people connect, but how it's always existed. Intersectionality and the multi-dimensions of ethnicities have always existed. And so what a great time now to bring it forward. And maybe when we're, all year identifying with different cultures, be able to do that. Because, there's Black Latins. You're talking about Black History Month. Well, let's look at the, the Dominicans. You want to go, around the world when we look at that. So I thank you guys for this incredible insight. And I do want to invite our audience to please ask questions in the chat. We will definitely respond and answer any of the questions for any of those of you that have questions. I'll ask our director, Erica, let us know if there's any questions in the chat, and we'll get that. I just want to shift a little bit for the next 20 minutes and talk a little bit about what's going on in the workplace. I will be honest with you, I was intentional with inviting Andreas and Neddy to be together because Neddy's experience represents financial services, consumer products and traditional corporate America, and Andreas represents the healthcare industry. And the corporations in healthcare are leading and doing a lot of different work. And so I wanted to be able to, so you guys know that, not just because I like you so much, but also because I think you bring a blended perspective. So as we shift a little bit, I'm just going to share a little bit of information, some data as I was looking. We gathered the data ourselves on the Diversity MBA Inclusive Leadership Index, and we were have looked at the population and the growth of people of color as compared to white American. But when we look at all groups together, actually about 46% of people of color as a group in the workplace, and will be shifting in the next 5 years to be more people of color than white Americans. But looking at some of making the business case for like why attracting the best talent, I just want to spend a couple minutes in sharing some really interesting insights, and then Andreas and Neddy, I'm going to ask you to react to this. But so the growing demographic, everyone knows the Hispanic population is the very reason, right? That in itself is why companies should accelerate their efforts. And let me say this to be clear. It's not that companies are minimizing their efforts to go and hire any other group or any other diverse dimension, but there are times when they have to focus and target to accelerate, to try to catch up. And Neddy and Andreas can definitely share some of that with you. But according to the Department of Labor, 78% of Hispanics will account for new net workforce entry between 2020 and 2030. So that means 1 out of 5 workers will be Hispanic. And so when you think about that, you're like, wow, yeah, that's great news to see that our workforce is browning, and that's great. But I'll tell you, Neddy and Andreas, what I'm not as excited about is the percent of the percent of Hispanics that are in let's say first level supervisors and less senior roles,
Yeah.
versus the percent of them in the workforce as it relates to management and leadership roles. And then I'm going to say this one last thing, and then get into some conversations with you guys. And this is just how I feel now. After I'm also a new published author, so this is how I feel now. Looked at the data over the last 10 to 15 years on diversity recruiting, and my goodness, those organizations that are intentional and want to make a difference are making the difference. And those organizations that aren't doing it are not doing it because they don't want to. I'm just telling you, it's just not a priority for them. And that's just fundamentally what I believe. You heard it here, I'm going to say it. I just believe they don't want to do it, because I now believe if you want to, you can. Now, there definitely has to be some best practice and some intentionality we're going to talk about around that. But I just wanted to, just have you guys react to what's happening in our workforce around the growth of the Hispanic population and what the realities are happening with advancing Hispanics into the role. And I'll share a little bit more about the detail, but I want to just get kind of both of your overarching perspectives. So Neddy, I'll let you start, and then Andreas jump in.
Yeah, the numbers that you shared don't surprise me, Pam. I think for the most part in major corporations, Hispanic workforce is acknowledged as what I call a staple of talent, right? But not necessarily talent that is purposefully being developed for senior level leadership. And so there are 2 things I think that fall in place to that. One is while there will be a lot more Latino workers in the marketplace, only about 3 to 4% actually will have master's degrees. Only about 9 to 10% will have bachelor's degrees, which tend to be in the higher paying type jobs. Even when I look at manufacturing, I do not see representation of ethnically diverse talent, as we call it at McCormick, but Latinos in particular, in those senior level positions. And so part of this has to do with how are organizations thinking about their talent pipeline development goals and objectives. Traditionally, in corporate America, while diversity has been very important in some of the work around human resources practices, et cetera, the focus has tended to be first white females, secondly Black males or Black females,
Right.
thirdly Hispanics, maybe Asians. Now the focus is around veterans and then Asians, then people with disabilities. That has not changed, I would say. And this is my personal experience on this, but having worked at 7 different companies, I have not seen that really change for over 20 something years, which is very disheartening because this work is so important. And the whole purpose of this work is to remove cultural barriers to help create the advancement of talent in general. And so while some companies have invested on the Latino workforce, I don't think it's been consistent enough. And there's a lot more work that needs to be done.
Right. Neddy,
Yeah,
that is,
that's powerful. Go ahead, Andres.
no, I was going to say that is well stated. Let me just add a couple of other points there just to amplify. Number one, and I think it has been said, there has to be intentionality and an investment made by the organization, right? And so if the organization or the industry or the field isn't willing to do that, we're not going to be able to get there, right? And so I think as I look at our strategies here at Freighter, a couple of things come to mind. Number one is, I remember 6.5 years when I arrived here, I asked for a diversity recruitment plan and what we're doing from an HR, and the answer was, we have nothing. And we had already, had created an office of diversity. I was not the inaugural chief diversity officer. So something to be said about, right, the disconnect and the value that was either found or not found in terms of building that as part of our cohesive strategy moving forward. But that was one of my first to-dos here. And I said, listen, I want to continue to double down on what we're doing externally, but we need to get the house in order. And we need to do that because when I looked at the data, to Neddy's point, most of our diverse staff, whether African-American, Black or Hispanic, Latinos or Latinx, they reside in frontline areas, right, as entry level. So whether it's, environmental services, cleaning the facilities, food and nutrition, right, taking those food trays into the patient's rooms or patient transport. And I said, so we need to actually re-engineer and reimagine what we're going to do in terms of our talent management strategy. So that really led us to become very creative. We created a career mobility office. And so that's the office now that create pathways to really then, right, even for our EVS folks to say, all right, so if you want to grow and we want you to grow with us, what are those pathways, whether clinical or non-clinical, that we need to create, right? And then invest in you and protect your time so you can go to school while at work, so you can actually further your education, right? And that you can actually continue to actually achieve your career aspirations. So I think that that's really fundamental and paramount. And then B, I think here within our ecosystem as well, we have also linked our BRG strategy to our talent management strategy and succession planning. That is a must do. That's a learning practice that I know Neddy has had actually in place for years. We were able to do that because we have learned from other organizations and industries that if you're going to be intentional, again, that's one of the strategies that you can do to accelerate some of that. So unless you do that and you're investing there and you're being purposeful, you're not going to achieve that goal. Last comment that I'll make, which is fascinating here. So about 2 years ago, our affiliated chambers of commerce asked all of our CEOs in the region, what is keeping you up at night? And 100% of them came back and said, the one issue that keeps us up at night, including my own CEO, Kathy Jacobson, was not only the recruitment, but more importantly, the retention of our diverse staff in Milwaukee. Here, a lot of our diverse staff who are homegrown only can get up to a particular level, right? Supervisory manager level, and then they have to expand their wings and go somewhere else because there's not an appetite here. There's not an acknowledgement that they are actually part of this vibrant community and that they have a lot to contribute to the organizations. So that really then launched what we call now the Region of Choice Pledge, which now we have very specific goals around workforce diversity. So recruiting is a 15% growth goal for everyone in the region who has signed that pledge, and then a 25% leadership diversity goal for the ranks, right, for the leadership ranks. And so that's how we're going to be tackling that. And actually, I'm fortunate enough that my CEO is the first female CEO who's going to be leading that particular group after actually now in November. And she said to me, Andres, guess what? I'm the chair of your diversity council. Failure is not in our vocabulary. We're putting this in hyperspeed. So I actually chair the steering committee that is working on the implementation side of that particular pledge. But again, there has to be intentionality, and it's just not just one organization or in one field. We have to actually cross-pollinate that if we're going to be successful here, and really leverage and harness the power that our Hispanic Latinos bring, because there's a lot that they have that they could offer, but we're not just tapping on that resource right now.
I will add one more thing, Pam, if that's okay.
Yes.
That
Yes.
is, right
Love
now, corporations are scrambling with this article that came out around the big resignation, right? And
Yes.
I tell people, look, this is the best time and opportunity, but if you're unsatisfied with your organization, et cetera, to go find where you need to be. Companies are offering all sorts of signing bonuses, all sorts of promotional opportunities, because there is now more than ever a recognition that there is a huge talent front for certain skills and capabilities, whether it be in the STEM space, such as in Andres' organization, or whether it be in the manufacturing space. And so this is the best time to really show whether or not to companies what the value is of that Latino population if they're leaving, right? If they choose to stay, that's different. You know, they're happy, they're content, that's great. They feel they have some growth opportunities. But I think this whole aspect of the big resignation is really forcing companies to rethink and engage in new conversations about what does talent pipeline development really mean, and how do we attract more diverse talent. I know at our company, the largest group of people that is making moves are those that are diverse talent. And so I have heard from other organizations that they're struggling with the same thing. So
Very
So,
great point. Those of us who will figure it out or have figured it out will turn
Yeah.
that great resignation into a great opportunity, right? And that will
Yeah.
become a differentiator for all of us. And so
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. That's absolutely
No,
right. That's smart.
I love that, and I love the passion that both of you have, because that's part of the resilience, right? And staying forward and doing it faster. So, you know, we've been having this conversation for a long time about what's happening. Thank you, Andreas, for a lot of the examples of intention. And we know that CEOs of color and women, that's just the reality. They get it done faster. I'm not going to say better. They just get it done faster. They get it, so they get there. And yes, you know, I saw the big resignation, and I'm like, so why is everybody talking about it as an obstacle? I mean, hey, this is great. This is an opportunity to do something. But Neddy, you mentioned something that's really critical when you talk about this is the number of Hispanics that are matriculating from undergraduate as well as first graduate. We know that, as well as master's, postgraduate. We know that also Hispanics is the largest group to have the first generation in colleges. But I'll tell you, one of the things that the poem I wrote, and one line of it says, don't just invest in STEM, invest in me when I'm 10.
yes.
So that's what has to happen, and that's part of the shift that has to occur with our large Hispanic populations coming here. We have to look at how companies get into the communities and get there faster, partnering with the government, so those different things. But let me just one more thought I want to, and then we'll move on. So we talked about recruit differently and hire with intention, but let's talk about one of the real issues. And yes, here I am bringing forward some stats from the book again. So who's doing the recruiting? I'm going to talk a little bit about bias and what the bias Hispanics are dealing with in the workplace. So we have right now 76% of our recruiters in the marketplace, as compared to our index, which there are more than 600 companies that participate, with an average employee size of 35,000. So we know, it's very robust index. So if you have that many white Americans that are recruiting, and of that number, 67% of them are women. So bias in talent acquisition, I'm not just talking workforce bias, but bias in talent acquisition is one of the areas that it manifests the fastest for systemic bias. So we know that you can't mitigate it because it's not from a behavior perspective, but you can from a systemic perspective. So companies are looking at policies and the way we do this and the way we do that. But how about when you have a group, a homogenous group that's doing the recruiting on the front line, bringing in their experiences, their affinities, you know, their in groups, their perceptions, and all of this stuff on the front end. And you know, someone, I'm just going to say it, someone shared the term with me, and they called the recruiters the gatekeepers. So wow, gatekeepers are folks that have goals to bring in diverse talent, but literally are enhanced blockers of getting folks beyond their biases so that they can get to the next level. So just wanting you to react to how do we faster help our recruiters on the front line, and when we're hiring, what are you doing, you know, to help to broaden those lens of folks? And then what are some of the biases that Hispanics are dealing with in the workplace? I know that's a lot, but I want to spend a little bit of time on this.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say I think we're still dealing with a couple of more than a couple, but I'll just name a couple. One is language bias. So individuals that may have an accent, they're still being discounted. They might have a PhD or a master's and be discounted because the recruiter, who may be monolingual, doesn't appreciate. And when you're looking at a global company, you definitely cannot be eliminating talent. You should be looking at skills, capabilities, and that should be the job of the recruiter. The other part is, I think all of us have biases, you know, conscious or unconscious biases, but the recruiter community does represent typically the community itself where the corporation is based. And if that community is pretty dominant as Caucasian, then what will happen is the tendency in general will be to defer to finding Caucasian talent. The second thing I think that happens is without KPIs, because we all know what you measure is what gets delivered, right? But without KPIs being institutionalized in those recruiters' goals and objectives, then you don't have the opportunity to begin to influence the organization and the makeup of the talent. The other thing is, and I've been very surprised, I won't name the company, but you can imagine, the organization has essentially told their recruiters to go out and hire people, but there are no KPIs that those recruiters are measured against other than time to hire. And so when you try and talk about diversity hiring goals, they're like, I don't need to do that. So I think it's important to educate hiring managers, make sure, have diversity panels for the interview process, and make sure that there are goals, specific goals that are part of the KPIs of the recruiter, and provide education and awareness, whether it be awareness on how to interview a diverse candidate or military candidate or a person with disability. But a lot of times, especially right now, when recruiters are working left and right to fill jobs, and they're being told, just get a person in the job, just, you know, get somebody in the seat. They're not thinking about these things, but yet they have a huge part to play in the influence of the talent pipeline of the future of the organization. And that to me is very concerning because, you know, we could be heads of diversity influencing that conversation, but if the recruiter has a mind of their own and they feel it's too much work to go out and look for a diverse slate because they're not being held accountable for meeting certain goals or objectives, they're going to take the easy route. That's just human, right? So I'll leave it there. Andres?
Yeah, Neddy, you're absolutely right. I mean, I will say that, you know, it starts with, again, the intentionality and is this a business imperative or not for the organization? You know, I'm certainly pretty lucky and blessed that I have a CEO who leads the way. She's truly the chief diversity officer. And when she cannot wear that hat, because she wears a couple of other hats, then I step in with our team to do that work, right? But I tell Kathy all the time, I mean, and going back to the comment that I made earlier around, you know, the importance of having a diversity recruitment plan, it starts there. You know, Neddy's point, you have to have strategies in place. You have to hold people accountable, and they need to understand what is my line of sight. But there's also something to be said about then also doing some education. So one of the things that we have done with our whole recruitment team, and actually with everyone in HR as an extension and ambassadors of our work, is that everyone has been inoculated with our DEI education, right? They understand what's required of them. And so a great example of that is with our recruitment team. We have actually, you know, provided unconscious bias education. We have provided also anti-racism, also education. So then they start understanding, wow, you know, so certainly my biases are going to play a role, right? And so how do I start examining my biases and really then, you know, challenging myself, right, moving forward to ensure that I'm actually, you know, providing a fair and equitable opportunity to those diverse candidates that we are certainly linking here, right, or that I'm engaging in. So that's one of the things that we've done. Number two, we have gone, and you mentioned this, Pam, we have gone down the path, and Neddy mentioned this as well, of looking at a, you know, we're conducting a full audit as part of our anti-racism efforts here to really understand, and we decided, again, to start inwardly. Let's start to get the house in order first before we go externally. So what are the policies, processes, and practices that we have? And so we're going to start with HR. So talent recruitment will be touched first. That has gotten in the way of really then bringing in a diverse slate of candidates for every single position that we have here, because that's actually our commitment as an organization to our community. So that's going to actually now force the issue to us to look at not only the policy is one piece, but let's actually talk about the processes and the practices that are going on here. And so that's the work that our team is engaging with talent delivery. So hopefully we can actually then start dismantling that systemic racism, undoing a lot of that stuff, and then building equitable and fair and just practices and approaches here moving forward. So that's where the intentionality comes in.
Yeah, how about that's really good. How about goals for Hispanic hires? Have you guys accelerated? Are you accelerating your intention to bring to both internal to advance Latinos internally as well as to increase the numbers that you're bringing on?
Right, we have. So as I mentioned earlier, we have that region of choice pledge, and that's not the only one. We also have the 1, 2, 3 for Equity pledge under the American Hospital Association that has, again, there's intentionality, and one of the clear goals there is about increasing not only the diversity of your workforce, but again, it's about creating ultimately, you know, having right within the ranks, leadership ranks, diverse leaders in healthcare management. So we do have goals. And actually, and here's the beauty of it. This year, we elevated 2 metrics to the organizational dashboard. One is around workforce diversity with that leadership diversity goal, and the other one is around health equity. So now this is actually part of the requirement for everyone to understand what's my line of sight, what's the work there. But we also have now the leadership accountability, and then our CEO has set it also to executive compensation. So that's the way in which we have done it, because honestly, until you do those things and you take those steps, nothing is going to change. And again, Kathy is not only doing that, but the latest one has been, she asked me and says, can you generate, and no, it's a lot of work for you, but hopefully our workforce analytics team can help you. Let's create a scorecard for every single leader. We're talking about almost 900 leaders, supervisors and above, but everyone is going to get a standardized now scorecard on 5 metrics. One of them is going to be around their diversity goals, their hiring goals. The other one is going to be around their health equity goals. And then the third one that we're building there is around education or participation of their staff and themselves in our diversity, inclusion, equity, and anti-racism efforts. So we want to see that everyone is actively participating, right? And really going through those immersion experiences to really then start becoming culturally competent moving forward.
Yeah, that's good. Neddy, do you have anything to add differently around the acceleration of Hispanic talent? Okay, thank you so much. So we're winding down to the end. This has been a great conversation, and I know we are talking about the advancement of Latino talent. I want to ask, just give a brief answer because I want to ask a couple questions before we wrap up. But so what can Latinos, Hispanics, whatever dimension of Latinx heritage they identify with, but as long as it's within the defined Hispanic definition of the U.S. Census, in the workplace do, maybe you guys can each give a couple nuggets that they can do to advance, if they feel qualified, to advance to the next level. Or what can also, and that's the individual, but also like what can, talent management do to look at the Hispanic talent in the organization to advance it faster. And I know we're talking about CEO commitment, so I'm going to ask you just to step down just a nugget and share from your experience, what else can be done. And I am honing in on the Hispanic talent because I just want folks to know what you're doing around that.
Ms. Neddy,
Go ahead.
You're muted.
You're muted again. Oh, did we lose the sound? Okay, I'll have Andrea start, and then Neddy will wait for your voice to. No, still talk to us. So we can see if your voice comes in.
Yes, I keep. For some reason, it keeps automatically muting me. So.
Okay.
So do you want me to start, or?
Please. Mm-hmm.
So at McCormick, we do have an ethnically diverse talent leadership academy focused on the leaders that are senior managers, directors, and potentially senior directors of the organization that are on the path for VP roles. So we've been running that for about 4 years now, and so we've continued. But that particular program is open to all ethnically diverse talent. We don't have a specific program focused just on Latinos. So one of the things that we are doing is we started to get involved with external partnerships with organizations like ASER and Alpha and others to make sure that if they have specific programs for Latinos, that we have some representation there. To be quite honest, McCormick is still kind of early in its stages, so it's not as robust as other companies may be. But what I will say is that it's really critical and important that the talent management group, talent development group, are really close partners to the diversity and inclusion office. And so when there is a disconnect from those two groups and the work of DEI, what ends up happening is they end up creating or initiating programs that don't necessarily focus on the development needs of certain groups of population. And so you can't just, I think nowadays, you just can't say, oh, splatter, we've just created a whole diversity leadership program and you just throw a bunch of people in there and you hope it sticks. And so you have to really be mindful of how you're growing that talent. I don't see right now where a lot of corporations are focusing that type of level of energy, but the ones that are, like Andres' organization, are going to end up with much better, more significant results of having a more holistic plan in place to really grow talent completely.
Thank you for that. Andres, you have something to add
I'll
briefly?
just amplify quickly here, Neddy, and she's absolutely right. Having those community strategic partnerships externally, it's a great way. Again, I think linking or ensuring that part of the value proposition for your diverse staff as they participate in the BRGs is that not only their time is protected, but that they're getting credit on their annual appraisal. And then thirdly, they get credit for that from a success, from a talent management perspective for succession planning. So that is part of what we have done here as well. And we're starting to see and reap those benefits. And then the other piece as well that I have encouraged a lot of our BRGs is maybe you might not get that development internally, but maybe you can get it externally by serving on advisory boards or community-based boards. That's the other piece that we're doing. And then again, making sure that they're getting credit for that because the organization reaps that benefit, right? By having a liaison and really having that individual, right, leverage their skill sets in that manner in our community. So those are other ways in which we are really fostering that. And we're seeing actually, finally, some obviously opportunities there. And we're certainly seeing the, hitting those percentages here internally.
And that is so good to hear that these are the practices that are taking place. I challenge companies because the companies that have actually leading at it, I call it the unapologetic effect. And that is where they're unapologetically taking Black talent and Hispanic talent in cohorts and developing them cross discipline together because they need the community within it. HM Health, Nielsen, GE, these companies are doing, and I'm just putting it out there. I love the work that Andreas is doing. I love the work that the programs that Neddy has, but we need more. We're talking about accelerating it because if you have a group of 100 of Hispanic leaders that are going through something together, they can go out now, and that will pollinate across the organization, the energy, the retention, loyalty, and the lessons within that. So that's the unapologetic, hint I have there. So you guys, this is
one more comment here, and I know Neddy has done this as well, which is the other part of the strategy here is if we don't have mentoring and sponsorship programs, that is something to think about. And again, we have to be, to your point, unapologetic about making sure. So our BRGs this year, we're piloting for all of our BRGs, mentoring and sponsorship. Again, some of it because of pledges that we have signed, like the Equity Collaborative from a gender equity perspective under the Carol Emmett Foundation, but we are replicating that for all of them. Again, that's another way in which we're gonna actually create that bench strength, and over time, we're gonna reap that benefit.
Well, that was my next question, Andreas, but that's okay. Absolutely right. Absolutely. That is absolutely the way to manifest. We know for a fact, right? We know for a fact companies, in fact, companies mentoring is now leveraged for development. It's no longer just, for early career coaching, but it's leveraged for development. Companies are using that. And you're absolutely right, Andreas. And also the way, Rhode Island Health is using their BRGs is leading practice across the best in class companies in terms of how you're leveraging those internal groups. And Eddie, the way, and same for you, Neddy, the academies and the way you leverage your BRGs and your ERGs and your networks. So let me just ask you guys in closing, this has been an incredible conversation. What advice do you have for the up and coming generation, and I am talking about Latinos, Hispanics, Latinx, that are entering the workplace? What must they do to be culturally prepared for retention, right, as well as for opportunity? Now, that's a big question, but I'd love for you guys to leave some key advice, some key nuggets. We have a couple minutes. Neddy, we'll start with you.
I would tell them to forget what their parents told them, which is keep your head down, work hard, and things will come. That is a falsity. It's sort of like the Cinderella story. The prince is going to bring you the slipper and the castle. So I would say it's really important as Latinos that we take charge of our own careers, that we invest in ourselves in finding those opportunities. And inside corporations, if you feel prepared to take on another role or activity, go for it. If there is a leader that stands out to you that you would like to get to know better, do not be shy. Go for it. Go meet that person. Do a 5-minute lunch or not lunch, but a 5-minute introduction or 15-minute coffee break. The only way to truly advance, regardless of whether you're Latino, Asian, or African American, is building the relationships, taking on the assignments that are going to give you the greatest exposure to an organization. You hopefully have a sponsor. If you don't, you need to make a conscious effort to find that sponsor on your own.
Yeah, great points, Neddy. I'll just add two very quick ones. Number one is, and I think Neddy really hit on this one, which is, I remember actually early in my career, my mentor actually said to me, raise your hand, volunteer for stretch assignments. And I think that that's important. Those of us who are willing to do that, then we're right? We're letting the organization know in our behaviors and actions that I want to grow. I am hungry to learn, to grow in this organization. So I would say that's important. And then the other piece that is paramount, and unfortunately I see this play out oftentimes, is I know the opportunity and the hunger that people bring to want to get promoted, but let's actually go to the basics. Become a well-rounded professional in your current role. there's something to be said about not cutting corners. Let's be competent and gain those skill sets, because that's the only way that's going to open doors in the future. If we try to cut corners, at some point, what got you there, it's not going to get you, right? And this whole fallacy as well of, you can fake it until you make it, it's not going to work. And what it will do, unfortunately, in an organization is that the minute that one diverse leader burn those bridges, it will close the door for everyone else, which is pretty unjust, because that's not the approach that we take when it's actually a white person or white leader, right, that also exercises that same approach. But I think it's really important, and I tell that all the time to our folks, take the time, grow into your role, develop your skill sets, because you're going to reap that benefit later on. So those will be my two key nuggets for anyone.
Those were excellent. I mean, so, it's not just about the many moments, but we need a movement. And that's what I'm hearing. So I want to thank so much Neddy Perez, the Global Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in McCormick and Company, and Andres Gonzalez, the Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer at Perez-How, Wisconsin Medical Center. You guys, this has been an incredible conversation. We thank you so very much for your time. I'm Pam McElvain, CEO of Diversity MBA Media. And
Thank you.
Erica, we're done?
Thank you.
Yes,
Erica?
we're done.
Thank you
Yes.
so much, Erica, for your technical support. You've gotten good. I thought Kendall was going to be in here, but you managed it.
Sounds
Okay.
good.